My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm 35 years old. And 3 months after I buried my husband, my mother-in-law arrived at my front door with a locksmith. Not flowers, not condolences, not even a phone call. A locksmith. She stood on my porch in a navy coat with her hands folded neatly in front of her. The locksmith waited beside her carrying a black toolbox. My 8-year-old daughter Emma was sitting on the living room floor coloring a picture of a horse when the doorbell rang. I remember because she looked up at me and smiled. Then she asked if Grandma June was visiting. I wish she hadn't, because for 1 second I forgot who June Hayes really was. For 1 second I thought maybe grief had softened her. Maybe she was finally coming to see her granddaughter. Maybe she had come because she missed her son. I opened the door. June didn't say hello. She didn't ask how we were doing. She didn't look at Emma. Her eyes went straight past me into the house. Then she said 4 words I'll never forget. "Time to move out?" I laughed, not because it was funny, because sometimes when reality becomes absurd, your brain reaches for the wrong response. June didn't laugh, neither did the locksmith. That's when I realized she was serious, dead serious. "I beg your pardon?" I asked. June pulled a folded document from her purse. "The house belongs to the Hayes family." She held the paper toward me. "David is gone now." David, my husband. The man I'd buried exactly 92 days earlier. The man whose side of the bed still looked untouched because I couldn't bring myself to sleep there. The man whose coffee mug still sat in the cabinet exactly where he'd left it. The man whose daughter still cried for him at night when she thought I was asleep. June said his name the way people mention the weather. Gone. Finished. Problem solved. Then she pointed toward the driveway. "You've had enough time." Behind me I heard Emma stand up. She was listening now. Children always know when something is wrong, even when you think they don't. Especially when you think they don't. I stepped outside and closed the front door behind me. "What exactly are you doing?" June's expression never changed. "The house was purchased with Hayes family money. It belongs to our family. You can rent an apartment." The locksmith looked uncomfortable. Good, someone should have been, because I wasn't. I was furious. But grief does strange things. It doesn't always come out as anger. Sometimes it comes out as exhaustion. And I was so tired from funeral paperwork. Tired from hospital bills. Tired from explaining death to a child who still expected her father to walk through the front door. Tired from pretending I was okay. I looked at June. Then I looked at the locksmith. Then I said something neither of them expected. "Show me the paperwork." For the first time all morning, June smiled, and that's when I knew she thought she had already won. What she didn't know was that 6 weeks earlier, while sorting through David's office, I had found a sealed envelope with my name on it. An envelope he specifically told his lawyer to deliver if anything ever happened to him. I hadn't opened it yet. Not because I forgot, because I wasn't ready. I thought it contained a goodbye. I thought it would be the last piece of my husband. I thought opening it would make his death real. Standing on that porch looking at June's smile, I suddenly realized it might be something else entirely. And later that night, after Emma was asleep, I finally opened it. What I found inside changed everything. That night after Emma fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, not peaceful quiet, the other kind, the kind that follows loss. The kind where every room feels slightly too large. I placed the envelope in front of me. It was plain white. My name was written across the front in David's handwriting. The sight of it almost made me put it away again. For 3 months I'd avoided opening it. 3 months of telling myself I wasn't ready, but after what happened on the porch, ready didn't matter anymore. I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a letter, and a second folded document. I unfolded the letter first. "Rebecca, if you're reading this, then something happened before I got the chance to explain a few things myself. The first thing you need to know is that I love you. The second thing you need to know is that my mother will not take this well." I stopped reading. My heart started pounding, not because of the words, because of how accurately he had predicted the future. I kept going. "You know how she is. You've always been kinder to her than she deserved. But there are things I never told you because I hoped I'd have time to fix them myself. If you're reading this, I didn't get that chance." My stomach tightened. The next paragraph changed everything. 3 years ago, I discovered that my mother had secretly taken money from the family trust my grandfather created. Not a little money, a lot. Enough that if it became public, people would ask questions she doesn't want answered. I stared at the page, then read it again, and again. June Hayes wasn't wealthy because she'd managed money well. She was wealthy because she'd stolen it. My hands started shaking. The letter continued. When I confronted her, she promised she'd replace it. She never did. Instead, she tried convincing me not to tell anyone. Then came the line that explained everything. I believe she's expecting me to stay silent forever. If something happens to me, she may decide she can pressure you the same way. Rebecca, don't let her. I sat back in my chair, completely stunned, because suddenly the woman who showed up with a locksmith made sense. The urgency, the confidence, the entitlement. She wasn't grieving, she was securing assets. Then I unfolded the second document. It wasn't a letter. It was a property deed. The house, our house, and printed across the top in black ink were words I never expected to see. Sole ownership transfer 3 years earlier. David's signature, legal notarization, everything. The house belonged to him, and before his death, he had transferred ownership entirely to me. Not shared ownership, not partial ownership, entire ownership. Mine, legally, completely. I actually laughed. A small, exhausted laugh. Because June had shown up with a locksmith so convinced she'd won. Meanwhile, she hadn't even known her own son had legally removed the house from her reach years ago. The next morning, I called the attorney whose name appeared at the bottom of the document. Harold Benson, 72 years old, sharp as broken glass. He invited me into his office that afternoon. After reading everything, he leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Hayes, I nodded. He tapped the deed. This house is yours. Relief flooded through me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Then Harold said something that immediately took that feeling away. However, I hated that word. However what? He folded his hands. Your husband wasn't worried about the house. My stomach dropped. What was he worried about? Harold opened a drawer, removed a thick folder, and placed it on the desk. I recognized David's handwriting immediately. The entire folder was full of it. Notes, records, copies of emails, financial statements. Years' worth of documents. Your husband left instructions. The room suddenly felt very small. What kind of instructions? Harold looked directly at me. The kind a man leaves when he believes his mother is going to become a problem. Silence. Then he slid the folder toward me. Rebecca, what you're holding is evidence. Evidence of what June Hayes did. Evidence David spent years collecting. Evidence he never wanted Emma to need. My pulse started racing. Because David hadn't simply expected trouble, he'd prepared for it. Carefully, quietly, for years. Then Harold said the sentence that kept me awake for the next week. Your husband believed June was hiding something much bigger than stolen trust money. I stared at him. What? Harold shook his head. I don't know. He tapped the folder. But David thought he was close to finding out. I looked down at the mountain of papers, years of notes, years of suspicion, years of secrets. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. The house was never the real prize. June hadn't come for the property. The property was just the beginning. Whatever she was actually afraid of was buried somewhere inside that folder. And David had spent years trying to uncover it before he died. I took the folder home. I told myself I wouldn't open it until Emma was asleep. That lasted 23 minutes. I made it as far as the driveway. Then I carried the folder into the kitchen and started reading. At first it looked like financial records, bank statements, trust documents, property filings, nothing dramatic, nothing shocking. Then I found David's notes in the margins. Small, careful, written in the same handwriting he'd used to leave lunchbox notes for Emma. Only these notes weren't loving. They were suspicious. Transfer doesn't match reported amount. Why is this account missing? Ask Uncle Robert about 2011 sale. Mom lied here. The words sent a chill through me. Page after page revealed the same pattern. Money disappearing, records changing, explanations that never lined up. And David had spent years quietly documenting all of it. Then I found something stranger. A photograph, old, at least 20 years old. June standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Both smiling, both holding a set of keys. On the back David had written, "Find out who really owns Cedar Ridge property." I frowned. I'd never heard of Cedar Ridge, never once. The photograph went into a separate pile, then another, and another. By midnight my kitchen table looked like a detective's office, and I still didn't understand what David had been chasing. Only that it mattered. A lot. The next morning I got my answer, or at least part of it, because June showed up again. This time without a locksmith. This time with my brother-in-law Mark, David's younger brother. Mark and I had always gotten along, not close, but friendly, which is why seeing him standing beside June hurt more than it should have. I opened the door, neither of them smiled. June looked irritated, Mark looked nervous, bad combination. "Rebecca," June began, "we need to discuss the house." I almost laughed again because she still didn't know. She still thought she had leverage. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Emma was inside doing homework. She didn't need this. "What exactly would you like to discuss?" June folded her arms. "The family has decided it would be best if the property remained with us." The family, interesting, not David's wishes, not legal ownership. The family, I looked at Mark, he wouldn't meet my eyes, that told me everything. June continued. "We're prepared to be generous." Generous. The word nearly made me choke. This woman had tried to throw me and her granddaughter out of our own home. Now she was offering generosity. "What kind of generous?" I asked. She named a number. A laughably small number, less than half the house's value. Mark finally spoke. "Rebecca," his voice sounded uncomfortable. "We just think everyone would be happier if this stayed in the family." I stared at him, then at June, then back at him. "Emma is family?" Silence. Mark looked away, and that was when something inside me shifted. Not anger, not grief, clarity, because for months I'd been treating this like a conflict. A misunderstanding, a family dispute. It wasn't. June wasn't trying to help. She wasn't grieving. She wasn't protecting anyone. She was trying to win, and she expected everyone else to fall in line, the same way they always had. I opened my purse, pulled out a copy of the deed, and handed it to her. For the first time all morning, June looked confused. Then she started reading. Halfway through the first page, her face changed. The color drained from it completely. She flipped to the second page, then the third. Then back again. "No," just one word, quiet, disbelieving. "No." I watched her read David's signature, watched her realize what her son had done. Watched her understand that the house was never hers. Not anymore, not ever again. Mark took the papers from her, read them himself, and immediately sat down on the porch steps like his knees had stopped working. June looked up at me. For the first time since David died, I saw genuine fear, not grief, fear. Because she hadn't expected resistance, and she definitely hadn't expected preparation. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Who gave you this?" Not "how did this happen?" Not "is it real?" Not "what did David want?" No. Her first concern was who gave it to me, because she already knew it was real. She already knew David had been planning something. And suddenly I knew something too. Whatever David had discovered, June was terrified I'd discover it next. She grabbed the deed, turned around, and walked toward her car, fast, much faster than she'd arrived. Mark hesitated, then followed her. But before getting into the passenger seat, he stopped, looked back at me, and quietly said, "Rebecca." I waited. He swallowed hard. "You should be careful." Then he got into the car and they drove away. I stood there for a long time afterward, thinking about what he'd said, not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded worried. Genuinely worried. That night I opened the folder again, and buried near the bottom, I found something David had hidden between two financial reports. A handwritten note, 3 lines long, nothing more. But after reading it, I couldn't sleep. Because written in David's handwriting were 6 words: "Ask Margaret what happened in 1998. And underneath, "Mom will do anything to keep it buried. Anything." I spent 3 days trying to figure out who Margaret was. At first, I assumed she was a relative, an aunt, a cousin, someone from David's side of the family, but nobody named Margaret appeared anywhere in the family tree. Not in photo albums, not in Christmas cards, not in old emails, nowhere, which made David's note even stranger. Ask Margaret what happened in 1998, that was it. No explanation, no address, nothing. Just a name and a year. By the 4th day, I was frustrated enough to call Mark. I didn't expect him to answer. He did, immediately, like he'd been waiting. "Rebecca." His voice sounded tired. I got straight to the point. "Who's Margaret?" Silence, not confusion, recognition, a very important difference. Then, "Where did you hear that name?" My heart started pounding, because now I knew Mark knew exactly who she was. "David left a note?" Another silence, longer this time. Then Mark sighed. The kind of sigh people make when they're deciding whether to betray someone or finally tell the truth. Margaret Ellis. The name meant nothing to me. Who is she? She used to work for my grandfather. I frowned. What does that mean? She handled the books. Books, my pulse quickened, family trust books, property books, financial books, whatever David had been investigating. Mark continued. She retired years ago. Where is she now? Again, silence. Then, Florida. I grabbed a pen. What happened in 1998? The silence that followed told me everything, because Mark didn't answer immediately. He sounded afraid, actually afraid. Finally, he spoke. I don't know exactly. Lie, not a big lie, a careful lie, the kind people tell when they know too much. I let him continue. But David thought it started then. Started. Not happened. Started. That single word changed everything. Because suddenly I wasn't looking for one event. I was looking for the beginning of something that lasted decades. Before hanging up, Mark said something else. Something that stuck with me. Rebecca, yeah, if you talk to Margaret. His voice lowered. Don't tell my mother. Then he hung up. That weekend I flew to Florida. I told Emma we were taking a short trip. Which wasn't entirely untrue. She spent the flight reading while I stared out the window trying to understand why my husband spent years chasing a secret he never shared with me. Part of me felt guilty. Like I was opening doors he intentionally kept closed. But another part remembered June arriving with a locksmith. Remembered her trying to throw us out. Remembered her face when she saw the deed. And that part kept going. Margaret Ellis lived in a small retirement community near Sarasota. Tiny white house. Blue shutters, wind chimes on the porch, nothing dramatic, nothing mysterious. Certainly not the home of someone holding a decades-old secret. When she answered the door, she looked exactly like a retired accountant should. Tiny, neat, sharp-eyed, 80 if she was a day. I introduced myself. The moment I said David's name, everything changed. The color drained from her face. Just like June's had, not fear, recognition, immediate recognition. You're David's wife. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. Margaret looked past me, then at Emma, then back at me, and suddenly she looked very sad. Come inside. That was not the reaction I'd expected. The living room smelled like tea and old books. Emma settled into a chair with a coloring book. Margaret sat across from me. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Then I finally asked, what happened in 1998? The room became very still. Margaret closed her eyes, and for 1 second she looked exhausted. Not old, exhausted, like she'd been carrying something heavy for 27 years. Then she whispered, so David finally found the trail. My heart nearly stopped because she wasn't surprised. She knew exactly why I was there, exactly. Margaret? She looked at me, and what I saw in her face scared me. Regret, the deep kind. The kind people carry for decades. Then she asked a question that made no sense. Did June already come for the house? I stared. How did you know that? Margaret laughed, one short bitter laugh, because apparently she knew June too, very well. Because that's what she always does. Always, not did, does, present tense. My pulse started racing. What happened in 1998? Margaret stood up, walked to a bookshelf, reached behind several old photo albums, and pulled out a large brown envelope. She carried it back carefully, like it weighed more than paper should. Then she placed it on the table between us. I looked down. Inside were dozens of documents. Property records, bank records, trust records, some over 30 years old, and at the very top, a single photograph. The same photograph I'd found in David's folder. June, the unknown man, the keys. Only this version had writing on the back. Margaret turned it over. I read 6 words and immediately understood why David spent years chasing the truth, why June was terrified, why she wanted the house, why she wanted control, because written on the back were the words, original owner before transfer fraud. My hands started shaking. I looked up. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and then she said the sentence that changed everything. Rebecca, she swallowed hard. June Hayes never inherited the family fortune. The room went silent, completely silent, then Margaret finished. She stole it. For several seconds I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. Stole it? Margaret nodded slowly. The expression on her face wasn't anger. It was guilt. 27 years of guilt. The kind that settles into a person's bones. I looked down at the documents spread across the coffee table, then back at her. How? Margaret sat heavily in her chair, And for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked every one of her 80 years. Because nobody checked, I stared. What does that mean? She reached for the photograph. The one with June and the unknown man holding the keys. The man in this picture was named Charles Whitmore. The name meant nothing to me, Margaret noticed. He wasn't family. That got my attention, immediately, not family. Then why was he standing beside June? Margaret continued. Charles owned Cedar Ridge. The same property David had written about. The same property he'd circled in his notes. The same property connected to everything. My pulse quickened. What happened to him? Margaret's eyes dropped. He died. The room went quiet. Then she added, 2 weeks after this picture was taken. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, not because people die, because of the timing, 2 weeks. Then she slid another document toward me, a property transfer form, old, yellowed with age, dated 1998. And there in black ink was June's name, receiving ownership, receiving assets, receiving control. Receiving everything. I frowned. But if she inherited it legally, she didn't. Margaret cut me off immediately, sharp, certain. The certainty frightened me because she'd clearly lived with this information for decades. Charles had no children. She tapped the paperwork. No spouse. Another tap. No living relatives. Then she leaned forward. And no connection whatsoever to June Hayes. I stared. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Too quiet. What are you saying? Margaret swallowed, then finally said it. June convinced everyone she was helping manage his affairs. My heart started pounding. She wasn't. Margaret laughed bitterly. No, the answer came instantly. Like she'd been waiting 27 years to say it, then she pointed toward a stack of records. She inserted herself. Page after page after page, property transfers, account changes, asset distributions. All flowing toward the same person. June, 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 June. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. And then I found something, a signature, Charles Whitmore, only it didn't match, not perfectly, not even close. I looked up immediately. Margaret nodded. She'd seen it too, years ago. Forgery. One word, one devastating word. My stomach turned, because now I understood. June hadn't inherited wealth. She hadn't built wealth. She hadn't earned wealth. She'd manufactured it, one document at a time, one signature at a time, one lie at a time, just like she'd tried to take my house, just like she'd tried to push me out, just like she'd spent years manipulating everyone around her. The pattern wasn't new, it was simply old enough to become invisible. I sat back, completely stunned. Then I asked the obvious question. If this is true, Margaret looked away. If, I corrected myself. When this is true, she nodded. I continued. Why didn't anyone stop her? For a moment, Margaret said nothing. Then she looked directly at me. And the answer hurt more than I expected. Because powerful lies are easier to believe than complicated truths. The room went silent again because she was right. June had spent decades building a reputation. Church leader, community volunteer, businesswoman, widow, philanthropist. People didn't see a fraud, they saw a respected woman. And respected women aren't supposed to steal fortunes. So nobody looked closely, except David, my husband. The one person who kept digging, the one person who never stopped asking questions, the one person who got closer than anyone else. Then a terrifying thought hit me. I looked at Margaret. What happened when David started investigating? Her expression changed instantly. Fear, real fear. The first genuine fear I'd seen all day. And suddenly I knew I wasn't going to like the answer, not at all. Margaret looked toward the window, then back at me, then finally whispered, Rebecca? I felt my stomach drop, because she looked afraid for me, not for herself, for me. Then she said the one sentence I never expected to hear. The year before David died? She paused, long enough for my heart to start racing. June found out he knew the truth. And suddenly every piece of the puzzle started moving at once. I didn't speak for several seconds. Neither did Margaret. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved closer while we were talking. Finally, I forced myself to ask, What do you mean she found out? Margaret closed her eyes, then opened them again. Slowly, carefully, like she was choosing every word. The last time David visited me was 14 months before he died. My pulse quickened, because that was long before the heart attack. Long before any of us knew anything was wrong. Margaret continued, He brought documents. She pointed toward the envelope on the table. More than you've seen, I frowned. More, she nodded. He'd found additional records. Records proving what? Margaret looked directly at me. That June knew exactly what she was doing. The room went silent, because there is a difference between suspicion and proof, a massive difference. David hadn't been chasing theories anymore. He'd found evidence. Real evidence. The kind that destroys reputations. The kind that ends carefully built lives. Then Margaret said something that made my blood run cold. He planned to confront her. I sat perfectly still. What happened? Margaret laughed bitterly. The sound carried no humor whatsoever. What always happens when powerful people think they're about to be exposed? I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because suddenly I remembered things. Small things, things I'd ignored at the time. David becoming withdrawn, late-night phone calls, arguments he never explained. The strange tension every time June's name came up. At the time I'd blamed stress. Now I wasn't so sure. Margaret stood up. Walked toward a filing cabinet, unlocked it. Then pulled out another folder, thinner, much thinner. She handed it to me. This is what was left. Left, the word bothered me immediately. I opened the folder. Inside were copies, not originals. Copies, and several pages were missing, entire sections gone. My stomach tightened. What happened to the originals? Margaret looked away. That was answer enough, but she gave one anyway. Someone took them. The room went completely still. Who? Margaret's silence lasted almost 10 seconds. Then, I think you already know. June, of course, June, again, always June. Every road seemed to lead back to her. I stared at the missing sections. Empty gaps where information should have been, and suddenly a question hit me. A question I should have asked hours ago. Why didn't David tell me? Margaret's expression softened. For the first time all afternoon. Because he loved you? The answer surprised me. She continued. He believed if he could fix it himself, you'd never have to carry any of it. That sounded exactly like David, painfully exactly. The kind of man who carried burdens alone because he thought protecting people meant hiding things from them. The kind of man who would have spent years investigating a family secret without saying a word. The kind of man who would have believed he still had plenty of time. The drive home was quiet. Emma slept most of the way. I couldn't. My mind kept replaying everything. The forged documents, the missing evidence, the stolen fortune, the house, the threats, the lies. By the time we reached Briar Creek, one thing had become painfully clear. June wasn't just protecting money, she was protecting an entire identity. Everything people believed about her, everything she'd built, everything she owned. If the truth came out, it wouldn't just cost her assets. It would cost her reputation. And people like June value reputation more than almost anything. The following Tuesday, I got a phone call, not from June, not from Mark, from someone I'd never met. Mrs. Hayes, the voice sounded nervous. Yes, my name is Thomas Whitmore. I nearly dropped the phone. Whitmore, the same last name, the same name from the documents, Charles Whitmore, the original owner. My heart started racing. Who are you? Silence. Then I'm Charles Whitmore's nephew. The room spun. Nephew, Margaret said. Charles had no family, no heirs, no one. I sat down immediately. What? Thomas laughed softly, not happily. More like someone who'd spent years hearing the wrong story. That's what June Hayes told everyone. The air left my lungs, because suddenly the entire case exploded wide open. Then Thomas said something even worse. Something that changed everything. My attorney found out you've been asking questions. Questions, plural, meaning other people knew, more people than I realized. Then he continued. My family has been looking for answers for 27 years. 27 years, a lifetime, and before I could process that, he delivered the sentence that made my heart stop. Mrs. Hayes, his voice lowered. We think your husband found the final piece of evidence before he died. The room went completely silent, because if Thomas Whitmore was right, then somewhere out there, David had hidden something so important, something so dangerous, that after 27 years of lies, people were still searching for it. And for the first time, I started to wonder if the reason June wanted our house so badly had nothing to do with the house at all. I didn't sleep that night, not after Thomas Whitmore's phone call, not after hearing that my husband may have found the final piece of evidence. And definitely not after realizing June Hayes had spent 3 months trying to force me out of a house she suddenly seemed desperate to enter. because the more I thought about it, the less sense her behavior made. If she only wanted the property, she would have accepted the deed and walked away. Instead, she'd kept pushing, kept showing up, kept pressuring. Like there was something inside the house she needed, something she couldn't risk losing. The next morning, I went into David's old workshop, a small building behind the house. The place he'd spent countless weekends fixing furniture, building birdhouses, and teaching Emma how to use sandpaper. I hadn't touched much in there since he died. It still smelled like sawdust and coffee, still felt like him. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then I remembered something, a conversation from 2 years earlier. David had been replacing a loose floorboard. I'd asked why he cared so much about an old workshop. He'd smiled and said, "Every house needs one place where important things can hide." At the time, I'd laughed. Now I wasn't laughing. 3 hours later, I was still searching. Drawers, shelves, toolboxes, nothing. By noon, I was ready to give up. Then Emma found it. Of course she did. Children notice things adults stop seeing. She was sitting on the floor coloring when she looked up. "Mom, yeah. Why is that board a different color?" I followed her finger near the back wall, one floorboard. Slightly newer than the others. My pulse immediately quickened. 10 minutes later, I had a pry bar. 5 minutes after that, the board came up. Underneath was a metal lockbox. Small, dust-covered, hidden for years. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside was a single flash drive, a sealed envelope, and a note in David's handwriting. "Rebecca, if you're reading this," Then I ran out of time. The world seemed to stop. I sat down right there on the workshop floor, Emma beside me, the letter trembling in my hands. David explained everything. Years earlier, he discovered evidence proving that Charles Whitmore had intended his estate to pass to surviving relatives. Real relatives? Not June, never June. The documents proving it had disappeared before probate was finalized. But David eventually found copies, enough proof, enough to expose everything. He'd stored digital backups on the flash drive, and he'd hidden them where nobody would think to look, including his mother. Then came the final paragraph, the one that explained everything, the one that finally made sense of June's desperation. "Mom found out I had evidence. She never found out where I hid it." I closed my eyes and finally understood. The house, the locksmith, the pressure, the manipulation, the threats. She wasn't trying to reclaim family property. She was trying to recover evidence. Evidence hidden somewhere inside the house. Evidence she feared more than anything else. That evening, I called Thomas Whitmore. The next day, we met with attorneys. 3 weeks later, the flash drive was verified. Every file authenticated, every record examined, every signature analyzed. The evidence was overwhelming, not assumptions, not theories, proof, 27 years of proof. The legal battle that followed lasted nearly 11 months. Longer than anyone expected, shorter than June hoped, because facts are stubborn things, and there were finally enough of them. The investigation uncovered forged transfers, missing assets, false filings, fraud stretching back decades, properties, accounts, money, millions of dollars. The story exploded. Local papers picked it up first, then state papers, then national outlets. People who had spent years praising June suddenly found themselves reading court documents instead. And court documents are much harder to charm than people. The final hearing took place on a rainy Thursday morning. I sat beside Thomas Whitmore. Mark sat several rows behind us, looking older than I'd ever seen him. And June. June sat alone, for the first time in her life. No church friends, no supporters, no carefully managed image, just reality. The judge's decision took less than 20 minutes. The fraudulent transfers were voided. The remaining assets were returned to the rightful heirs. Several additional matters were referred for further investigation. And just like that, the empire June spent 27 years building was gone, not in anger, not in revenge. Simply in truth. Afterward, as everyone stood to leave, June approached me, slowly, carefully, older than she had looked even a year earlier. For a moment I thought she might apologize. She didn't. People rarely become different at the very end. She stopped a few feet away, looked at me, then asked, "Did David know everything?" I thought about it, then answered honestly. "No." June frowned. I continued. "He knew enough to keep looking." For the first time, she looked sad, not caught. Not defeated, sad, like she finally understood what had cost her the most. Not the money, not the reputation, her son. The The son she'd lied to, manipulated, and eventually lost. She nodded once, then walked away. I've never seen her again. These days Emma is 10. The house is still ours, the workshop too. Sometimes she sits in there drawing while I clean. Sometimes we talk about David. Sometimes we don't. But every year on his birthday, we open the lockbox. The flash drive is gone now. The evidence belongs to history, but we kept the letter. The letter that started with, "If you're reading this, then I ran out of time." And every time I read it, I think about something David once told me. The truth doesn't move fast, but it never stops moving. For 27 years, the truth waited. For 27 years, lies looked stronger. Then one day, they weren't. And in the end, the thing that exposed June Hayes wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even me. It was a husband who loved his family enough to leave a trail behind. And a daughter who noticed one floorboard that looked different from the rest. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional family drama stories, shocking betrayals, powerful comebacks, and unforgettable endings. And tell me in the comments, would you have opened the letter right away or waited like I did?